The dust swirled through the streets of Cedar Ridge like restless ghosts, coating everything in a fine layer of brown grit. It was the kind of dust that got into your teeth, your hair, your very soul. Sarah Mackenzie stood at the edge of the cemetery, her black dress whipping around her ankles in the hot wind. The wooden cross marking her husband's grave was already weathering, just 3 months old but looking ancient in this unforgiving land. "I'll never love you," she whispered to the wind, to the memory of love itself. Never again. The words tasted bitter as alkali water. Tom Mackenzie had been dead 93 days, shot down in Murphy's saloon over a poker debt he couldn't pay. $20, that's all his life had been worth in the end. $20 and a widow's pension of grief that would last forever. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter despite the heat. Behind her, the town of Cedar Ridge sprawled in the valley like a collection of wooden toys left by a careless child. The saloon where Tom died stood at one end of Main Street, the church at the other, with Sheriff Watson's office squatting between them like a referee in an endless fight between sin and salvation. She heard footsteps on the gravel path but didn't turn. Probably Mrs. Henderson come to offer more of her suffocating sympathy, or perhaps Banker Morrison to remind her again about the mortgage on Tom's land. They all looked at her the same way now, the men with a mixture of pity and calculation, wondering how long before desperation might make her agreeable to certain proposals. The women with sympathy threaded through with judgment, as if widowhood might be contagious. "Ma'am?" The voice was deep, unfamiliar. Sarah turned to see a man she'd noticed but never spoken to, the rancher who owned the Double Bar Ranch 20 miles north, Jacob Sullivan, if memory served. He stood with his hat in his hands, revealing sun-weathered features and hair gone early gray at the temples. Maybe 40, maybe 45. Hard to tell with men who lived their lives under the prairie sun. "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Came to pay respects," he said simply. "Knew your husband some good man." Sarah almost laughed at that. Good man. Tom had been weak, foolish, unable to resist the lure of cards and whiskey, but she held her tongue. The dead deserved their dignity, even if they'd squandered it in life. "That's kind of you to say." Sullivan shifted his weight, boot heels grinding against the stones. "Also came to say, noticed your barn doors hanging loose. Storm season's coming. Happy to fix it if you'd like." She stiffened. So it began already. The offers of help that came with invisible strings attached. "I can manage, thank you." "No charge intended," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Just being neighborly. I said I can manage." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded and placed his hat back on his head. "Reckon you can at that. Good day, Mrs. Mackenzie." She watched him walk away, his stride long and purposeful. When he reached his horse, a big roan that matched its owner in solid, unflashy reliability, he swung into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. That evening, Sarah struggled with the barn door as wind gusted through the homestead. The bottom hinge had pulled loose from the rotting wood, and every time she thought she had it secure, another gust would wrench it free. Her hands were raw from the rope, her back aching from the effort. "Damn you, Tom," she muttered, then immediately felt guilty. But the guilt was laced with anger that had been building for months, maybe years. He'd left her with 40 acres of stubborn land, a half-built house, debts to seemingly half the county, and this stupid barn door that she couldn't even fix. By the time full darkness fell, she'd managed to tie the door shut with enough rope to hopefully last the night. Tomorrow she'd have to swallow her pride and ask Will Patterson at the hardware store to come help. He'd want payment. Of course, everything required payment. And Tom had left her with nothing but debt and a piece of land everyone seemed to think she should sell. Inside the small house, she lit the kerosene lamp and sat at the rough table Tom had built during their first hopeful month here. The wind howled outside, making the walls creak. In the corner, Tom's rifle stood propped against the wall, loaded, as he'd taught her. A woman alone needs protection. he'd said, not considering that the greatest danger to her security had been his own weaknesses. She heated beans and a bit of salt pork for supper, eating mechanically while shadows danced on the walls. This was her life now. This emptiness, this struggle, this careful rationing of every penny and every ounce of strength. The neighbor women said it would get easier with time, but Sarah knew better. It would only get harder as her small savings dwindled and the land demanded more than she could give. Later, lying in the bed that still smelled faintly of Tom's tobacco, she let the tears come. Not for him, she'd cried those tears already. These were tears of fear, of rage at being left alone in this harsh country with the vultures already circling. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sobs. Though there was no one for miles to hear, "I'll never love again," she whispered fiercely into the darkness. "Never give another man the power to leave me like this." The wind answered with a mournful howl, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote added its voice to the night's lament. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the relentless sun and the endless list of chores. Sarah was feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching. She tensed, then relaxed slightly when she saw it was Jacob Sullivan again, this time with a younger man she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mackenzie." Sullivan touched his hat brim. "This is my hand. Miguel, noticed yesterday that door needs more than fixing. Whole frame's rotted through. Brought some lumber from my place. No good to me, and it'll just go to waste otherwise." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse again, but she looked at the barn, at the door now hanging completely askew despite her rope efforts, and pragmatism won over pride. "I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." Sullivan was already dismounting, pulling tools from his saddlebags. "Miguel, get that lumber unloaded." She watched, jaw clenched. As the two men set to work, Sullivan stripped off his jacket, revealing powerful shoulders and arms that spoke of years of hard labor. He worked steadily, efficiently, speaking only to direct Miguel or ask for a tool. Within an hour, they had the old frame removed and were fitting the new lumber. "Why?" Sarah finally asked, unable to bear it longer. "Why are you doing this?" Sullivan paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because it needs doing," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to face this land alone." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was a weight in those gray eyes, a familiarity with the loss that matched her own. "I don't need charity," she said, though with less heat than before. "No," he agreed. "You need a barn door that closes proper. Different thing entirely." By noon, the job was done. The door swung smooth and true on new hinges, fitting snugly in its frame. Sullivan and Miguel packed up their tools, refusing her offer of a meal with polite firmness. "One more thing," Sullivan said, pulling a wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. "Bread. Rosa, my cook, makes more than we can eat. Shame to waste it." Before Sarah could protest, he'd set the bundle on her porch and mounted his horse. "Good day, Mrs. Mackenzie." She watched them ride away, the bread warm and fragrant in her hands. Her stomach growled, reminding her that pride made a poor meal. But as she unwrapped the still warm loaves, tears pricked her eyes again. Not from sorrow this time, but from a kindness she hadn't expected and didn't know how to repay. That night, the wind came again, but the barn door held firm. Sarah lay in bed listening to the familiar creaking of the house, but underneath it was something new, the solid thud of a door properly hung, keeping her animals safe. She thought of Sullivan's weathered face, his careful distance, the way he'd offered help without making her feel pitiful. "No," she said aloud to the darkness. "I'll never love you, any of you, never again." But even as she said it, she knew the greater challenge wasn't keeping men at bay. It was surviving this land alone, maintaining her independence when everything and everyone seemed determined to prove she couldn't. Tomorrow would bring new struggles, new tests of her resolve. Outside, the coyotes called again, and the wind carried the scent of coming rain. Storm season was indeed approaching, and Sarah Mackenzie would face it as she'd sworn to face everything now. Alone, defiant, and with her heart locked away where it could never be broken again. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Sarah was in Milligan's general store, carefully counting coins for flour and coffee, when the door burst open and Jed Harper stumbled in, face white as bleached bones. "They hit the Carver place," he gasped. "Burned the barn, took everything weren't nailed down." "Mrs." Milligan clutched her throat. "The Branson gang? Who else?" Jed collapsed onto a barrel. "Bill Carver tried to stop him. He's at Doc Pritchard's now, bullet in his shoulder." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Carver ranch was only 12 miles from her homestead. The Branson gang, 3 brothers and their crew of outlaws, had been terrorizing the county for months, growing bolder with each raid. Sheriff Watson seemed powerless to stop them, or perhaps unwilling. Some whispered the gang had friends in town, people who profited from their crimes. "Meeting tonight," Jed continued. "Sullivan's place. Every man with a gun and the grit to use it." That evening, Sarah watched from her porch as riders passed on the road, heading north to the Double Bar Ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood. Fitting, she thought, for what was brewing. Part of her wanted to saddle Tom's horse and join them, but women weren't welcome at such gatherings, and she had learned the hard way that challenging conventions only made her situation harder. 2 days later, she understood why she'd been excluded from the meeting, but not from its consequences. Mrs. Mackenzie. Banker Morrison stood on her porch, hat in hand but eyes hard as flint. Behind him waited 2 other men she recognized. Carl Henshaw, who owned the land adjoining hers, and Lloyd Garrett from the land office. "Gentlemen," she didn't invite them in. Morrison cleared his throat. "I'll come straight to the point. This gang situation has everyone concerned about security. Isolated properties, especially those managed by, well, by those who might be vulnerable." "You mean women," Sarah said flatly. "I mean anyone who might not be able to properly defend valuable land," Morrison continued smoothly. "Now, Mr. Henshaw here has made a generous offer for your 40 acres. Very generous, considering the circumstances. My land isn't for sale." Henshaw stepped forward. "Now, Mrs. Mackenzie, be reasonable. What happened to Bill Carver could happen to anyone out here alone. At least consider—" I said no. "The note on your property comes due in 6 months, Morrison reminded her. "Selling now would clear that debt and leave you with enough to start fresh somewhere safer. Maybe back east with family?" "I have no family back east. This is my home." The 3 men exchanged glances that made her skin crawl. "Think about it," Morrison said finally. "My offer stands, but perhaps not for long. These are dangerous times." After they left, Sarah barred the door and checked Tom's rifle. Her hands shook as she counted the ammunition. 23 bullets. Would it be enough if the Branson gang came calling? Would she even have the chance to use them? That night, she lay awake listening to every sound, every creak of wood or rustle of wind. When hoofbeats drummed past on the road around midnight, she clutched the rifle until her knuckles ached. But the riders passed by, and gradually her hammering heart slowed. Morning brought Jacob Sullivan to her door, and for once, she was almost glad to see him. "Heard Morrison paid you a visit," he said without preamble. Him and Henshaw. News travels fast. It does when vultures are circling. His jaw tightened. "They've been after your land since the day Tom died, maybe before." Something in his tone made her ask, "Why do you care?" Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "Because what they're doing isn't right. Using fear to drive people off their land. It's no better than what the Branson gang does. Just legal. So what am I supposed to do? I can't fight them all." "You don't have to fight alone." He paused. "I've organized patrols, armed riders checking the outlying ranches. Your place is on my route 3 nights a week." "I don't need—" "Yes," he interrupted quietly. "You do. We all do. This isn't about charity, Mrs. Mackenzie. It's about neighbors looking out for each other because the law won't—" She wanted to argue, but the memory of last night's terror was too fresh. "I won't be beholden to you. Didn't ask you to be, just asked you to stay alive." He touched his hat brim. "I'll be by Tuesday and Friday nights, around midnight. Keep a lamp in the east window if all's well. No lamp, I'll know to come check." Before she could respond, he was back on his horse and riding away. The system worked for 2 weeks. Sarah would lie awake Tuesday and Friday nights until she heard the soft clip-clop of Sullivan's horse passing by. The lamp burned steady in her window, and he never stopped, just continued his patrol. It should have made her feel safer, but instead, it reminded her how vulnerable she truly was. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Thursday, not one of Sullivan's patrol nights. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed the rifle and crept to the window. Her heart nearly stopped. 3 men were by her chicken coop, torches in hand. One was already spreading kerosene on the barn wall. "Come on out, widow woman," one called. "We know you're alone in there." She recognized the voice. Whitey Branson, the youngest and meanest of the brothers. Her mind raced. 23 bullets, 3 men that she could see, maybe more hidden in the darkness. "Got a proposition for you," Whitey continued. "You can walk out now with whatever you can carry, or we can smoke you out like a rabbit. Your choice." Sarah's hands were steady now, fear crystallizing into cold rage. They wanted her land, just like Morrison and Henshaw, but they'd take it by force instead of legal trickery. She sighted down the rifle barrel, drawing a bead on the man with the torch near her barn, her newly repaired barn. The shot cracked like thunder. The man spun and fell, torch flying from his hand. Sarah was already reloading, moving to another window as return fire splintered the wood where she'd been standing. "Kill her!" Whitey screamed. "Burn it all!" More shots, muzzle flashes in the darkness. Sarah fired again, missed, ducked as bullets whined overhead. Smoke was rising from the chicken coop now, her birds squawking in terror. She counted muzzle flashes. 5 men, not 3. Her ammunition wouldn't last. Then new gunfire erupted from the north, the thunder of horses at full gallop. Sullivan's voice roared above the chaos. "Branson, stand down or die where you stand!" The outlaws scattered like rats. Sarah saw Sullivan vault from his horse, rifle already at his shoulder. Behind him rode Miguel and the 2 other men she didn't recognize, all firing at the fleeing gang. One outlaw made the mistake of turning to shoot. Sullivan's rifle barked once, and the man crumpled. "The barn!" Sarah screamed, seeing flames licking up the wall. Miguel and another rider were already moving, beating at the flames with blankets, while Sullivan and the 4th man pursued the fleeing outlaws. Sarah ran out with buckets of water from the rain barrel, coughing in the smoke, desperate to save what Sullivan had just repaired. 20 minutes later, the fire was out, leaving only charred boards and the stench of smoke. 2 outlaws lay dead in her yard, the one she'd shot and the one Sullivan had dropped. The others had vanished into the night, including Whitey Branson. "How?" Sarah gasped, still catching her breath. "How did you know?" Sullivan's face was grim, streaked with soot. "Saw them riding this way from town. Figured they weren't making a social call." He looked at the bodies, then at her. "That was good shooting. I was protecting what's mine." The adrenaline was fading now, leaving her shaky. "Yes," he said quietly. "You were." Sheriff Watson arrived at dawn with a deputy, making disapproving noises about the bodies and the violence. But with Sullivan and his men as witnesses, even Watson couldn't twist the facts. Self-defense, clear and simple. "Still," the sheriff said, eyeing Sarah coldly. "A woman living alone, inviting such trouble." "Inviting?" Sarah's temper flared. "They came to burn me out. Now. Watson held up a hand. "I'm just saying, maybe it's time to reconsider. Henshaw's offer, get off my land." Her voice was ice. Watson's face darkened, but Sullivan stepped forward, hand resting casually on his gun. "You heard the lady. Sheriff, time to go." After they left, Sarah found herself alone with Sullivan. The morning sun revealed the damage. The burned coop, the scorched barn, bullet holes peppering her house. But she was alive, and the land was still hers. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You held them off yourself." Sullivan replied, "I just helped finish it." She looked at him then, really looked at him, saw the weariness in his eyes, the way he favored his left side where a bullet had creased his ribs. This man who owed her nothing had risked his life for her. "Don't," she said suddenly. "Don't what? Don't think this changes anything. I'm grateful, but don't think—" She struggled for words. "I'll never love you." "Or anyone. I can't." Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, understanding. He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to, just trying to be a decent neighbor." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and because you're fighting to hold on when everyone expects you to give up. That takes courage." He mounted his horse, wincing slightly. "I'll send Miguel to help repair the damage. No arguments," he added as she opened her mouth. "The Bransons aren't done. They'll be back, and you need secure shelter." As he rode away, Sarah stood in her yard among the ashes and blood, feeling something she didn't want to name. Not love, never that, but perhaps the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. The double-bar ranch spread across the landscape like a kingdom carved from grass and stone. Sarah sat stiffly on the wagon seat as Miguel drove her through the main gate, her few salvageable possessions piled in the back. Pride tasted bitter in her throat, but she'd had no choice. The house was unlivable until repairs could be made, and Sullivan had been quietly insistent. "Just until your place is fixed up," he'd said. "Rosa's got a room off the kitchen that's standing empty." Now, seeing the ranch in full daylight, Sarah felt even more out of place. The main house was built of stone and timber, solid as the mountains that rose behind it. Barns, corrals, and bunkhouses spoke of prosperity and permanence. Everything her struggling homestead wasn't. Rosa emerged from the house as they pulled up, a sturdy Mexican woman with silver threading through her black hair. Her dark eyes assessed Sarah shrewdly before softening. "Senora Mackenzie, come. You need food and rest." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the kitchen garden. Sarah set down her carpet bag, one of the few things that hadn't reeked of smoke, and fought the urge to cry. How had it come to this? Taking charity from a near stranger, driven from her own land by outlaws and circumstance. "Is not charity," Rosa said, as if reading her thoughts. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Senor Sullivan, he knows about pride, also knows about being stubborn fool. You stay, you heal, you go home strong. Is practical, no?" Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. Practical, yes. Life at the double bar fell into a rhythm. Sarah insisted on earning her keep, helping Rosa in the kitchen and garden despite the older woman's protests. She saw little of Sullivan. He left before dawn and returned after dusk, always working. But sometimes she'd catch glimpses of him from the window, talking with his men, mending tack, or working with the horses. On her fourth evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Sarah stood on the covered porch watching lightning split the sky, feeling the electricity in the air. The wind smelled of rain and sage. "Quite a show." Sullivan's voice came from behind her. He moved to stand beside her, careful to keep distance between them. Tom hated storms, she found herself saying. Said they made him nervous. "Smart man. Storms out here can kill you quick as any bullet." He paused. "But they're beautiful too. Terrible and beautiful at once." Thunder crashed, making her jump. Without thinking, she shifted closer to him, then caught herself and stepped away. "I'm not afraid," she said quickly. "Didn't say you were." They watched in silence as rain began to fall. Softly at first, then in sheets that obscured the barns. The temperature dropped, and Sarah shivered in her thin shawl. "Here." Sullivan shrugged out of his jacket and held it out. "I don't—" "Take it. No strings attached, just keeping you from catching pneumonia." She took the jacket, wrapping it around herself. It smelled of leather and tobacco and something uniquely dangerous. That smell. Dangerous to notice it, to find comfort in it. Tell me about your wife, she said suddenly, needing to remind herself that she wasn't the only one with ghosts. Sullivan went still. For a long moment, only the rain spoke. Elizabeth, he said finally. Been gone 8 years now. Fever took her and our daughter both, same winter. Sarah's breath caught. A child, too. No wonder his eyes held such depths. I'm sorry. Long time ago, but his voice said otherwise. Sold everything back in Missouri, came out here to start over, built this place up from nothing. Work helps, keeps you from thinking too much. Yes, Sarah whispered. It does. Lightning illuminated his profile. Strong jaw, lines carved by sun and sorrow. He turned to look at her, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. I should go in, Sarah said quickly, shrugging out of his jacket. Thank you. She fled before he could respond, heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. Days passed. Sarah learned the rhythm of the ranch, the names of the hands, the personality of each horse. She discovered Sullivan had a library, unexpected in this rough country, and lost herself in books during the long evenings. Sometimes she'd find notes in the margins, Sullivan's careful handwriting commenting on passages. Through these glimpses, she began to know him, thoughtful, educated, a man who'd chosen this hard life rather than fallen into it. One evening, she was reading by lamplight when he knocked on the doorframe. May I? She nodded, marking her place. He entered carefully, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. Wanted to tell you, your house is almost ready. Miguel says 2 more days, maybe 3. Oh. She should feel relief, eagerness to return to her independence. Instead, she felt, what? That's good news. Is it? He studied her. You could stay longer if you need. Rosa enjoys the company. And you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes darkened, but he answered steadily. I enjoy it too, but I know you value your independence. I do. She stood, suddenly restless. I have to. It's all I have left. Sarah, he caught himself. Mrs. Mackenzie. Independence and isolation aren't the same thing. Aren't they? She faced him, chin raised. Tell me, Mr. Sullivan, when you built this place up from nothing, how many people did you let help you? How many did you trust with your pain? His jaw tightened. Point taken. Is it? Because from where I stand, you're just as alone as I am. You just hide it better behind all this. She gestured at the room. The ranch beyond. Maybe so. His voice was quiet. But I'm trying to change that. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. This was too much, too close to things she'd sworn to keep buried. I should retire, she said stiffly. Thank you for the update about my house. But he didn't leave. Instead, he moved closer, still not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. I'm not Tom, he said quietly. I'm not asking for your heart. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe you don't have to face everything alone. I can't. The words came out broken. Don't you understand? I can't lose anyone else. I won't survive it. You're stronger than you think. No. She shook her head violently. You don't know. You don't know what it was like, watching him die, knowing I couldn't save him, knowing he'd brought it on himself with his weakness, and still loving him, still mourning him despite everything. I can't do that again. Tears were flowing now, the storm inside matching the one still raging outside. Sullivan reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. I know, he said softly. God help me. I know exactly what that's like. Elizabeth was pregnant when the fever took her. I watched her fade, watched our daughter slip away before she could even draw breath. I know about loving someone and losing them and wondering how you're supposed to keep breathing. Sarah looked up at him through her tears, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. Without thought, she leaned into him, and his arms came around her carefully, as if she might break or flee. They stood that way for a long moment. Two souls who understood the weight of loss. Then Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. I should go. Sarah, don't! She held up a hand. "Please, I need time to think." He nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Good night, Mrs. Mackenzie." After he left, Sarah sat on the narrow bed, wrapping her arms around herself. She could still feel the warmth of his embrace, the steady strength of him. It terrified her. This pull she felt. She'd built her walls so carefully, brick by brick, mortared with pain and determination. Now she could feel them cracking, and she didn't know if she had the strength to shore them up again. Outside, the storm was passing, thunder rumbling away toward the east. But inside Sarah, a different storm was just beginning, a battle between the safety of isolation and the dangerous possibility of connection. She'd sworn never to love again, never to give anyone the power to destroy her. But as she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the rain gentle against the roof, she wondered if she was protecting herself or simply choosing a different kind of death, one that left her breathing but not truly living. The thought followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of storms and strong arms and a voice saying her name like a promise. Tomorrow she would rebuild her walls, remind herself of her vows. But tonight, in the darkness of a stranger's ranch house, Sarah Mackenzie allowed herself to feel the first stirrings of something she'd sworn to bury forever. The whispers started the day Sarah returned to her homestead. She'd barely unloaded her few belongings when Mrs. Patterson appeared at her gate, ostensibly bringing a welcome-home pie but really fishing for gossip. 2 weeks at the Sullivan Ranch, the woman said, eyes glinting with malicious curiosity. "People are talking, dear. Let them talk." Sarah took the pie with stiff courtesy. "I had nowhere else to go while my house was repaired." Of course. Still, a young widow, an unmarried man. You understand how it looks." After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah stood in her restored kitchen, fury burning in her chest. How dare they? She'd lost her home to outlaws, accepted help to survive, and now her reputation was being shredded by bored townspeople with nothing better to do than spin tales. The next few days brought more visitors, each with thinly veiled questions and knowing looks. Even at Milligan's store, conversation stopped when she entered, resuming in hushed tones after she passed. Sarah held her head high, but inside, she seethed. Sullivan appeared on her doorstep a week after she'd returned home. She hadn't seen him since that night of the storm, and the sight of him, tall, solid, concerned, made her traitorous heart skip. "Heard there's been talk," he said without preamble. "There's always talk." She didn't invite him in, standing firm in the doorway. "Small towns thrive on it." "Sarah, Mrs. Mackenzie," she corrected sharply. "We can't be familiar, Mr. Sullivan. Not anymore. You must see that." His jaw tightened. "So you'll let their narrow minds dictate your life?" "I'll protect what little reputation I have left," she shot back. "It's all a widow has in this world. That's horse." He caught himself, running a hand through his hair. "That's nonsense, and you know it." "Is it? Who's going to buy eggs from the scandalous widow? Who's going to extend credit at the store if they think I'm—" She couldn't say the words. "If they think you're what? A woman who accepted help when she needed it? You know what they think." Sullivan's eyes flashed with anger. Not at her, she realized, but at the situation. "Then they're fools. Perhaps, but they're fools who control whether I survive here or not." They stared at each other across the threshold, so much unspoken between them. Finally, Sullivan stepped back. "If that's how you want it, it's how it has to be." But even as she closed the door, Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. The damage was already done. Over the next days, she felt the town's judgment like a physical weight. Banker Morrison happened to stop by, reminding her about the note coming due. Sheriff Watson made more frequent rides past her property. Even the traveling preacher gave her a sermon about proper conduct for widows when he passed through. The breaking point came at Murphy's Saloon, the same establishment where Tom had died. Sarah never went there, but she was passing by on her way from the feed store when she heard her name. Living with Sullivan for 2 weeks. 2 weeks! And her husband not cold 4 months in the ground. Always thought she was too high and mighty, another voice added. Turning down Henshaw's offer like she's better than us. Maybe Sullivan's warming her bed and her land both. Sarah froze, packages trembling in her arms. She should walk on, ignore them, but fury overrode wisdom. She pushed through the saloon doors. The conversation stopped dead. 5 men sat around a table, cards and whiskey forgotten as they stared at her. Pete Henshaw was among them, his smile slow and unpleasant. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, voice like ice, "I believe you were discussing me?" "Now, Mrs. Mackenzie," one began. "No." She set down her packages with deliberate calm. "You've had your say. Now I'll have mine. Yes, I stayed at the Double Bar Ranch after outlaws that some of you were too cowardly to pursue, burned my home. Mr. Sullivan offered Christian charity. Nothing more. Christian charity," Henshaw sneered. "That what they're calling it now?" The crack of her palm across his face echoed through the saloon. Henshaw lurched back, hand to his reddening cheek, eyes murderous. "You bit—" "Finish that sentence," a deep voice said from the doorway. "And you'll answer to me." Sullivan stood there, danger radiating from every line of his body. He moved into the saloon with the controlled grace of a predator, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. "This ain't your business, Sullivan," Henshaw spat. "The lady's honor is very much my business." "Her honor?" Henshaw laughed ugly. "What honor does a woman have who—" Sullivan's fist connected with Henshaw's jaw before he could finish. Henshaw went down hard, scattering cards and glasses. 2 of his friends jumped up, reaching for guns, but Sullivan already had his Colt drawn. "Anyone else want to insult Mrs. Mackenzie?" Silence stretched taut. Then Henshaw struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. "You'll regret this. Sullivan, both of you. Get out," Sullivan said quietly. "And if I hear one more word against Mrs. Mackenzie from any of you, we'll settle it permanent." After they slunk out, Sullivan holstered his gun and turned to Sarah. She was shaking now, reaction setting in. Without a word, he gathered her packages and guided her outside. "You shouldn't have done that," she said as he helped her into her wagon. "Neither should you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But I'm glad you did. Henshaw's had that coming for years. It'll make things worse. Maybe. Or maybe it'll make them think twice before waggling their tongues." He loaded her packages, then surprised her by climbing onto the wagon seat beside her. "I'll drive you home. Jacob, let them talk," he said firmly, using her own words from days ago. "I'm tired of letting fear and propriety keep us dancing around each other." As they drove through town, Sarah was acutely aware of every stare, every whispered comment, but also aware of Sullivan beside her, solid and unashamed, protecting her with his presence as he'd protected her with his fists. "Why?" she asked quietly as they left town behind. "Why risk your reputation for mine?" He was quiet for a long moment, handling the reins with practiced ease. "Because you're worth it," he said finally. "Because you're the first person in 8 years who's made me want to do more than just exist, and because I'm done letting other people's opinions matter more than what's right." "Jacob, I know what you're going to say. You can't love again. You won't risk the pain. I understand that. But I'm not asking for your love. I'm asking for a chance to be your friend, your ally, to face this harsh world together instead of alone." They'd reached her homestead. He helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment. "Think about it, Sarah. Just think about it." That night, Sarah treated the cuts on her knuckles from slapping Henshaw, almost smiling at the pain. She'd scandalized the town, probably ruined what was left of her reputation. But for the first time since Tom's death, she'd felt alive. Felt like herself instead of the proper widow everyone expected her to be. And Sullivan, Jacob, had stood with her, fought for her, claimed her honor as his business in front of everyone. Tom would never have done that. Tom would have slunk away, avoided confrontation, maybe gambled away more money to soothe his wounded pride. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering words she'd heard years ago. The heart wants what it wants. She'd thought her heart was dead, buried with Tom in the churchyard. But maybe hearts could surprise you. Maybe they could learn to beat again, even when you'd sworn they wouldn't. Outside, a rider passed on the road, one of Sullivan's patrols, keeping watch, keeping her safe. She thought of his words, facing the world together instead of alone. It terrified her. It thrilled her. It made her question everything she'd told herself about survival and independence and the walls she'd built so carefully. In the distance, a coyote howled, and its mate answered. Even the wild things knew that some battles were better fought in pairs. Sarah Mackenzie sat in her empty house, nursing her bruised knuckles and her conflicted heart, and wondered if she had the courage to stop fighting alone. The Branson gang struck again 3 weeks later, this time hitting the Donnelly farm. Old Patrick Donnelly was dead, his son Timothy left for dead, and their entire herd driven off. The news reached Sarah as she was mending harness in her barn, Miguel bringing word from the double bar. "Senor Sullivan says to be ready," Miguel told her grimly. "The sheriff, he does nothing, so we ride tonight." Sarah's blood chilled. "Ride where?" "To end this." Miguel's young face was hard. "We know where they camp, in the canyon country, north of Skull Ridge. Tonight, we finish it." After he left, Sarah paced her small house like a caged animal. She thought of Sullivan, Jacob, riding into battle against desperate men. The Branson gang had nothing left to lose now. They'd be savage as cornered wolves. Her hands trembled as she cleaned Tom's rifle. Checked the ammunition. 23 bullets, minus the one she'd used defending her barn. 22 shots between her and whatever was coming. Near midnight, she heard horses approaching, many horses, moving fast. She grabbed the rifle and crept to the window. Her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Sullivan's patrol, but 5 riders, and even in the moonlight, she recognized Whitey Branson's pale hair. They'd come for her while the men were hunting them in the canyons. A trap, or maybe just cruel opportunism. "Widow Mackenzie!" Whitey's voice was high, excited. "Got unfinished business with you." Sarah's mind raced. No time to saddle a horse and flee, no help coming. Everyone was miles away. Hunting shadows in the canyons, just her, the rifle, and 5 killers. She barred the door, shoved the heavy table against it, then took position by the window. Her first shot took one of the outlaws out of his saddle. The return fire shattered glass, showered her with splinters. "Burn her out!" Whitey screamed. "Like we should have done before." Sarah kept firing, conserving shots, making them count. Another outlaw went down, clutching his shoulder, but they were surrounding the house now, and she couldn't cover all angles. The acrid smell of smoke reached her. They'd fired the lean-to on the east side. She heard wood splintering at the back door. No time to think, only react. She spun, fired, saw a shadow fall back, but the front door was weakening under repeated blows. Smoke was thickening, making her eyes water. This was how it would end. Then, fighting alone, as she'd insisted on living. The bitter irony of it made her want to laugh or cry. She'd pushed away the one person who might have. The thunder of approaching horses cut through her thoughts. Gunfire erupted outside. War cries she recognized, Sullivan's men, arriving like cavalry. She heard Jacob's voice roaring orders, the sharp crack of rifles, screams of pain. The battering at her door stopped. She peered through the shattered window to see a battle raging in her yard. Sullivan was in the thick of it, fighting with controlled fury. But Whitey Branson had dismounted, was creeping around the burning lean-to, heading for the back of the house where the door was damaged. Sarah ran through the smoke-filled rooms, reaching the back door just as Whitey kicked it open. They faced each other in the flickering firelight, both armed, both desperate. "Should have sold when you had the chance." Whitey snarled, raising his pistol. Sarah was faster. Tom's rifle bucked in her hands, the shot taking Whitey's center chest. He looked surprised, almost offended, as he crumpled to the floor. "I'll never sell," she told his corpse, then stumbled outside, coughing as the roof began to collapse. Strong arms caught her, pulled her away from the burning house. Jacob's face swam into focus, streaked with dirt and blood. Not his own. she hoped. "Sarah, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak through the coughing. Around them, the battle was ending. 3 outlaws lay dead, including Whitey. 2 others knelt with hands raised. Sullivan's men standing guard. "The house," she managed to gasp. "Just walls and wood," Jacob said roughly. "You're what matters." She looked at her home, fully ablaze now. Everything she'd fought to keep going up in smoke. The irony was complete. She'd saved the land but lost everything on it. Tears ran down her face, mixing with soot and sweat. "Come on," Jacob said gently. "Nothing more to do here." As he led her to his horse, Sheriff Watson finally arrived with a posse, conveniently after the fighting was done. His face was furious as he surveyed the scene. "Sullivan, you had no right. They attacked Mrs. Mackenzie." Jacob cut him off. "Again. While you sat in town doing nothing. Again. You took the law into your own hands. Someone had to." Watson's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as Sullivan's men shifted positions, hands on their own weapons. The message was clear. The sheriff's authority was broken, if it had ever truly existed. "This isn't over," Watson spat. "Yes," Jacob said quietly. "It is. The Branson gang is finished. Your protection racket with them is finished, and if anything happens to Mrs. Mackenzie or any other honest citizen while you're sheriff, you'll answer to me personally." Watson paled, but said nothing more. He and his posse collected the surviving outlaws and bodies, departing without another word. Sarah stood watching her house burn, feeling strangely empty. She'd won, survived the attack, killed Whitey Branson herself, kept her land, but at what cost? Everything she owned was ash and ember. "Sarah," Jacob touched her shoulder gently. "You'll stay at the ranch. No arguments this time." She turned to face him, seeing her own exhaustion mirrored in his eyes. "People will talk." "Let them." His jaw set stubbornly. "I'm done caring what narrow-minded fools think. You need help, and I'm offering it. Not charity, friendship, partnership, whatever you're willing to accept." The fight went out of her. What was the point of preserving a reputation when she had nothing left to preserve it for? "All right." As they prepared to leave, she took one last look at the burning ruins of her home, in the ashes of her old life. Something new would have to grow. She just didn't know what yet. The ride to the double bar was a blur. Sarah swayed in the saddle, reaction and exhaustion hitting hard. Jacob stayed close, steadying her when needed. Behind them rode his men, victorious but somber. They'd won, but the cost had been high all around. At the ranch, Rosa took charge, whisking Sarah away for a bath and bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Sarah lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events. She'd killed a man, shot him dead without hesitation. The good Christian woman she'd tried to be was horrified, but the survivor she'd become felt only grim satisfaction. Whitey Branson would never terrorize anyone again. Near dawn, she gave up on sleep and ventured to the kitchen. Jacob was there, slumped at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked up as she entered, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Couldn't sleep either." She shook her head, pouring her own coffee and sitting across from him. In the lamplight, she could see the toll the night had taken, a gash on his cheek, bruises already forming, the weight of leadership and violence in his expression. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming, even though you were hunting them elsewhere. Miguel had a bad feeling. Sent him to check on you while we searched the canyons. When he saw the flames..." Jacob's hands tightened on his cup. "I've never ridden so hard in my life. I'm sorry," Sarah said, "for being such a burden, for my stubbornness putting everyone at risk." "You're not a burden." His voice was fierce. "You're the strongest woman I know. You faced 5 killers alone and survived. You've faced this whole damn territory's prejudice and persecution and never backed down. I backed down from you," she said softly. "Pushed you away because I was scared." "Are you still scared?" She met his eyes, seeing the hope there barely contained. "Terrified," she admitted. But I'm tired of letting fear rule my life. Tired of being alone. Tired of... She gestured helplessly. All of it. Jacob reached across the table, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Sarah placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady. We'll rebuild, he said. Your house, your life. Together. If you'll let me. I don't know if I can love you, she whispered. Not the way you deserve. Not yet. I'm not asking for your love tonight, he replied. I'm asking for a chance to prove that not all partnerships end in loss, that maybe two broken people can build something whole. Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling the last of her walls crumbling like her burned house. In its place was something fragile but alive. Hope. It terrified her more than any outlaw's gun. But as dawn light crept through the windows, painting the world in soft gold, she thought maybe terror was just another word for possibility. And maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to find out. The summons to appear before the town council came 2 days later, delivered by Deputy Collins with barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah read the formal notice, her jaw tightening at each word. They're saying I can't manage the land properly, she told Jacob, pacing his study like a caged cat. That a woman alone is incapable of maintaining property in these dangerous times. Jacob took the paper, scanning it with darkening expression. Morrison's behind this. Him and Henshaw. They're using the attack as excuse to force you out. Can they do that? They can try. He set the notice aside, but they'll have to go through me first. The council meeting was set for Saturday. Word spread quickly, and by the appointed day, half the town had crowded into the small courthouse. Sarah entered with her head high, Jacob at her side, Rosa and Miguel behind them in silent support. The 5 council members sat behind a raised table like judges. Morrison held the center seat, his satisfaction poorly hidden. Sheriff Watson lounged against the side wall, still nursing his grudges. This hearing will come to order, Morrison announced. We're here to discuss the matter of the Mackenzie property and whether its current management serves the best interests of Cedar Ridge. You mean whether I'll sell to Henshaw? Sarah said clearly. Mrs. Mackenzie, you'll speak when recognized. Morrison warned. I recognize her, Jacob said, standing, and I'll stand as her advocate in this proceeding. You have no standing here. Sullivan, you're not her husband or kin. I'm her neighbor and friend. That's standing enough. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morrison's face flushed, but he couldn't deny the claim without appearing even more biased than he already did. Very well, state your case. Jacob stepped forward. Mrs. Mackenzie has maintained her property despite extraordinary challenges. Drought, debt, and outlaws. She's faced them all. The only threat to her land comes from those who'd steal it through legal trickery rather than honest dealing. That's slander, Henshaw burst out. Is it? Jacob turned to face him. Then why did you approach her the day after her husband's funeral? Why pressure her when she was grieving and vulnerable? I made a fair offer. You tried to exploit a widow's grief for profit. Jacob's voice cut like a blade. And when she refused, you've used every tool at your disposal to force her out, including this farce of a hearing. Morrison banged his gavel. Mr. Sullivan, these accusations are entirely accurate. A new voice interrupted. Everyone turned as Judge Theodore Blackwood entered the courthouse. The circuit judge wasn't due for another month, but here he stood, imposing in his black coat despite the dust of hard travel. Your Honor, Morrison stammered. We weren't expecting... Evidently not. Blackwood moved to the front. I received some interesting telegrams about irregularities in Cedar Ridge. Thought I'd investigate personally. His sharp eyes found Sheriff Watson. You'll be interested to know the federal marshals arrested what was left of the Branson gang yesterday. They were quite talkative about their arrangements in this town. Watson went pale, hand moving to his gun, then thinking better of it. Now then, Blackwood continued. What's this about seizing a widow's lawful property? Morrison tried to rally. The woman cannot properly manage. The woman, Sarah stood, her voice ringing clear, has a name, and she's managed her land through drought, violence, and the hostility of powerful men who resent her independence. If that's not proper management, I don't know what is. You've been living at the Sullivan Ranch, one council member pointed out. Unmarried, unchaperoned. Because her home was burned by outlaws while the law did nothing. Jacob interrupted. Would you prefer she lived in the ashes? The propriety. Damn propriety. The words burst from Sarah before she could stop them. Gasps echoed through the room. But she pressed on. I've lost my husband, my home, nearly my life. I've fought outlaws, killed to defend what's mine, and still you question my propriety? What would satisfy you? Should I have died prettily rather than survive messily? The room fell silent. Even Morrison seemed taken aback by her vehemence. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat. Mrs. Mackenzie raises valid points. I see no legal grounds for seizure of her property. Unless there's evidence of actual mismanagement, beyond her choice of temporary shelter, this hearing is concluded. Your Honor, Morrison tried desperately. The woman, Mrs. Mackenzie. She cannot possibly work 40 acres alone. It's impractical. I won't be alone. Sarah heard herself speak. Felt Jacob turn to stare at her. She took a deep breath. Knowing she was about to cross a line she'd sworn never to approach again. Mr. Sullivan and I. She paused, heart hammering. We intend to marry. The courthouse erupted. Through the chaos, Sarah saw Jacob's stunned expression transform into something bright and fierce. He moved to her side, taking her hand publicly, definitively. Is this true, Sullivan? Judge Blackwood asked when quiet restored. If the lady will have me, Jacob said, eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Nothing would honor me more. Well then, Blackwood's stern face cracked into what might have been a smile. Seems the property will be well managed indeed. This hearing is dismissed. And Sheriff Watson, a word, if you please. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with gossip. Sarah found herself outside in the blazing sun, Jacob's hand still holding hers. Rosa and Miguel stood nearby, Rosa dabbing at her eyes with fierce joy. Sarah, Jacob said quietly, you don't have to. Hush. She looked up at him. I meant it. But you said... I know what I said. I said I'd never love again. I said I'd never give another man power over me. She squeezed his hand. But you never asked for power. You offered partnership, protection without possession. And somewhere between fighting outlaws and facing down hypocrites, I realized something. What? She pulled him away from curious ears. Into the shadow of the courthouse. I realized I was dying anyway. Slower than a bullet, but just as surely. Living behind walls, afraid to feel, afraid to trust, that's not living. It's just existing. Sarah, I can't promise to love you the way I loved Tom, she continued. That was young love, foolish and blind. But maybe I can love you better, wiser, with eyes open to who you really are instead of who I wish you were. Jacob cupped her face gently. I don't want you to love me like you loved him. I want you to love me as the woman you've become, strong, fierce, uncompromising. The woman who stands up to councils and outlaws alike. That woman is terrified, Sarah admitted. But she's more terrified of wasting her life in fear than risking her heart again. Then we'll be terrified together. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Two scared souls trying to build something good in this hard land. Kiss her already, Rosa called out, making them both laugh. But Jacob grew serious again. Not here, not for their entertainment. He stepped back, keeping her hand. When I kiss you, Sarah Mackenzie, it won't be for show or to seal a business arrangement. It'll be because you want me to, completely and without reservation. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in thought. Sarah had just changed her entire future with a few words in a courtroom. Panic tried to claw up her throat, but she pushed it down. She'd made her choice, not from desperation or pressure, but from the simple recognition that Jacob Sullivan had proven himself in every way that mattered. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the desert, Sarah found Jacob on the porch, watching the sunset. She sat beside him, comfortable in the silence that fell between them. "When?" he asked eventually. "Soon," she replied. "After we rebuild my house, I want to bring something of my own to this partnership. You bring yourself. That's more than enough. Still, let me have this. One thing that's mine to offer freely." He nodded. "Whatever you need." They sat as darkness gathered, not touching but aware of each other. Sarah thought of her vow at Tom's grave. "I'll never love you." She'd meant it then, every word. But life had a way of making liars of us all. And sometimes the best lies were the ones we told ourselves for protection until we were strong enough to face the truth. She wasn't there yet, wasn't ready for his kiss or his bed or the full weight of what marriage meant. But for the first time in months, she could see a future beyond mere survival, a future with laughter and partnership and maybe, eventually, a love deeper than anything her younger self could have imagined. The stars emerged one by one, and Sarah Mackenzie sat with the man she'd sworn never to love, feeling the first fragile threads of connection spinning between them like silk in moonlight. The rebuilding began with the sunrise. Sarah stood on her charred land, watching Jacob and his men arrive with wagons full of lumber, tools, and hope. Miguel jumped down first, grinning as he surveyed the ruins. "We'll make it better than before, Senora, you'll see." And they did. Over the following weeks, a new house rose from the ashes, stronger, larger, built with care and craftsmanship. Sarah worked alongside the men, learning to handle a hammer and saw, her hands growing calloused but capable. Jacob was there every day, directing the work but also laboring beside her, their partnership beginning in sawdust and shared effort. The town watched, of course. Some with disapproval that faded as Judge Blackwood's continued presence made corruption dangerous. Others with curiosity about this unconventional couple who'd announced marriage but lived apart, building side by side like equals rather than traditional man and wife. "You swing that hammer like you were born to it," Jacob said one afternoon, watching Sarah nail boards with determined precision. "Maybe I was." She paused to wipe sweat from her brow. "Maybe I just needed the chance to find out." He smiled, that slow, warm expression she'd come to treasure. Tom never knew what he had, did he? It was the first time he'd mentioned her late husband so directly. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Tom saw what he wanted to see, a pretty girl who'd keep his house and warm his bed. He wasn't cruel, just limited. He couldn't imagine I might want more. "What do you want, Sarah?" She looked around at the rising walls, the busy men, the wide sky above. This work that matters, a partner who sees me as I am, a life built on truth instead of pretense. And love? The question hung between them like dust motes in sunlight. Sarah set down her hammer, meeting his gaze steadily. "Ask me again when the house is finished." He nodded, accepting her timeline as he'd accepted everything else, with patience and understanding that still amazed her. The work continued. Rosa came often, bringing lunch and staying to help. She and Sarah worked on the interior while the men handled the heavy construction. It was Rosa who noticed Sarah's changing demeanor first. "You smile now," she observed, hemming curtains for the new windows. "Before, even when you tried, your smiles never reached your eyes. Now they do." "Do they?" Sarah touched her face self-consciously. "See, and Senor Sullivan, he smiles too, real smiles, not the polite ones he's worn for 8 years. Rosa's dark eyes were knowing. "You're good for each other. We're not, we haven't. I know." Rosa patted her hand. "But you will. When you're ready. The heart knows its own time." That night, Sarah lay in her bed at the ranch, thinking about Rosa's words. Her heart had been so certain it was dead, murdered by grief and betrayal. But here it was, beating steadily, even daring to race when Jacob smiled at her in that particular way. Not the desperate, consuming passion she'd felt for Tom. That had been wildfire. Beautiful, but destructive. This was different, deeper, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was painting the new porch rails when a woman approached on horseback, elegant despite the dust, with auburn hair and expensive clothes that marked her as not from Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Mackenzie. The woman dismounted gracefully. I'm Catherine Morrison. From Denver. Sarah tensed. Another Morrison. If you're here about your father's business, I'm here to apologize. Catherine's green eyes were direct. My father wrote boasting of his plans to acquire your land. I came to stop him, but Judge Blackwood beat me to it. She smiled wryly. Father is currently enjoying the hospitality of federal custody, along with Sheriff Watson. Sarah set down her paintbrush slowly. I see. I also came to warn you. My father had partners, silent ones who won't be pleased their scheme failed. You and Mr. Sullivan should be careful. We're always careful. Good. Catherine glanced at the rising house. It's beautiful. You're rebuilding well. We are. Something in her tone made Catherine study her more closely. May I speak freely? Woman to woman? Sarah nodded cautiously. I was married once, to a man who saw me as an accessory. A prize to display. When he died, consumption, not violence. I thought I'd never risk my heart again. The pain seemed too great, the potential for loss too terrible. She paused. I was wrong. Closing off your heart doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll face that pain alone. Why are you telling me this? Because I see myself in you. That careful distance, that wariness despite obvious affection. Mr. Sullivan is a good man. I've made inquiries. Don't let fear rob you of happiness. After Catherine left, Sarah stood staring at the half-painted rails. Everyone seemed determined to push her toward Jacob, as if her caution was foolishness rather than wisdom. But was it wisdom anymore, or just habit, like a scar that ached in bad weather long after the wound had healed? That evening, she found Jacob in the barn at the ranch, mending tack by lantern light. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his features. Sarah, is everything all right? Catherine Morrison came by today. His hands stilled. Morrison's daughter? What did she want? To warn us, and to share some unsolicited advice about hearts and walls and fear. She moved closer. Everyone seems to have opinions about us. They always will. He set aside the leather. Does it bother you? It used to. Now. She took a breath. Now I think maybe they see something I've been too scared to admit, which is, instead of answering with words, Sarah did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward, placed her hands on his shoulders, and kissed him. It wasn't the passionate kiss she'd shared with Tom in their early days, all heat and hunger. This was quieter but deeper. A question and answer all at once. Jacob's hands came up to cup her face, gentle but sure, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, two wounded hearts daring to try again. When they parted, Sarah was trembling. The house is almost finished, she whispered. 3 more days, maybe 4, then ask me again. About what I want, about love. She pressed her forehead to his. I think I'll have a different answer. Sarah, I know what you're going to say, that I don't have to rush. Don't have to promise anything I'm not ready for, but I am ready, Jacob. Maybe not for everything, not all at once, but ready to stop letting fear decide my life. He pulled her close, and she let herself be held, feeling safe in a way she hadn't since before Tom's death. Maybe before that. Even, this wasn't the safety of walls and distance. It was the safety of trust, of choosing to believe that some risks were worth taking. I love you, Jacob said quietly into her hair. I've loved you since you stood in that cemetery, fierce and broken and determined to survive. I'll love you whether you love me back or not, whether you marry me or not. That won't change. Sarah pulled back to look at him. In the lantern light, she could see everything in his eyes, patience, desire, understanding, hope, all the things Tom had never offered, maybe hadn't known how to offer. The words stuck in her throat. Not yet. She wasn't ready to say them yet, but soon. I care for you, more than I thought possible. Maybe that's not enough. It's everything, he interrupted. It's a start. We'll build from there, like we built your house, board by board, day by day. She kissed him again, sealing the promise. Tomorrow they'd return to the work, to the watching eyes and wagging tongues. But tonight, in the quiet of the barn with the horses nickering softly and the lantern casting golden shadows, Sarah Mackenzie let herself believe in second chances. The heart she'd thought dead stirred fully to life, painful as thawing frostbite, but just as necessary. She'd sworn never to love again, built walls high as mountains to prevent it. But life had conspired, through outlaws and rebuilding, through shared work and quiet understanding, to prove her wrong. And for the first time since Tom's death, being wrong felt like the beginning of everything right. Spring arrived like a blessing after the harshest winter anyone could remember. Sarah stood on the porch of her rebuilt home, watching the desert bloom with unexpected color. Purple lupines and golden poppies carpeted the hills, and even the stubborn old cottonwood by the well had burst into leaf. Never seen it so green, Jacob said, riding up with supplies from town. He swung down from his horse, moving with the easy grace she'd come to love, like the land itself is celebrating. Celebrating what? She asked, though she knew the answer. New beginnings, second chances. He climbed the steps to stand beside her. Us. It had been a year since the Branson gang's attack, 6 months since their quiet wedding in the rebuilt house with only Rosa, Miguel, and Judge Blackwood as witnesses. 6 months of learning what it meant to truly share a life with someone, not just the pretty parts, but the hard work, the disagreements, the compromise of two strong wills finding balance. Any regrets? Jacob asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Sarah leaned into him, thinking of all the changes this year had brought. The land was thriving under their combined management. The new sheriff, a decent man from Tucson, had brought real law to Cedar Ridge. Even the townspeople had shifted from gossip to grudging respect, as Sarah and Jacob proved their partnership in deeds rather than words. No regrets, she said, though I sometimes wonder what Tom would think, seeing all this. Does it matter? She considered that. Once. Tom's opinion had been her whole world. Now he was a gentle ghost, a reminder of who she'd been rather than who she'd become. No, she said finally. It doesn't. A dust cloud on the road drew their attention. A wagon approached, loaded with furniture and followed by a small herd of cattle. As it drew closer, Sarah recognized the drivers, a young couple from back east who'd bought the old Henshaw place after Carl fled town ahead of federal investigators. The Millers, Jacob observed. Good people. They'll do well here. If they can survive the first year, Sarah added, remembering her own struggles. They'll have better neighbors than you did. He squeezed her gently. We'll make sure of that. It was true. Where once there had been isolation and hostility, now there was community. Sarah had learned that strength didn't mean standing alone. It meant knowing when to reach out, when to accept help, when to offer it in return. That evening, they rode out to check the cattle, moving through the golden light like they had dozens of times before. But this time was different. This time, Sarah carried a secret that would change everything again. They stopped at the rise overlooking both their properties, his vast spread and her modest 40 acres now joined in purpose, if not in deed. The sun painted the desert in shades of rose and amber, and somewhere a mockingbird sang its borrowed songs. Jacob, she began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. He dismounted and helped her down, concern creasing his features. What is it? Are you feeling ill? No, yes, sometimes. She took a breath. I'm with child. The words hung in the air between them like suspended gold dust. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, fear, wonder, before settling on something that made her heart ache with its tenderness. Sarah, he cupped her face in his hands. Are you certain? Rosa suspected first, then Doc Pritchard confirmed it. 2 months along, maybe a bit more. A baby. His voice was reverent. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy? He laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the desert. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. But Sarah, are you, after what you said about not wanting to love again, about protecting yourself? I'm terrified, she admitted. Terrified of losing this child like you lost yours. Terrified of the pain if something goes wrong. But Jacob, I'm more terrified of not trying. Of letting fear rob us of this chance. He kissed her then, deep and sweet, full of promise and understanding. When they parted, both had tears on their cheeks. I swore I'd never love you, Sarah whispered. Do you remember? That night you brought me to the ranch after the fire. I looked you in the eye and swore it would never happen. I remember. I was so certain, so absolutely sure I could control my heart, keep it locked away safe. She laughed softly. But your kiss stole my heart, just like the foolish romance novels claim, except it wasn't one kiss, it was 1,000 small moments. Every board we nailed together, every meal we shared, every time you looked at me like I was worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. Worth everything. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now. Not with the blind passion I felt for Tom, but with something deeper. I love your patience, your strength, your terrible jokes that make Rosa roll her eyes. I love how you treat me as an equal, how you've never tried to cage me or change me. Why would I change perfection? Hardly perfect, stubborn, prideful, too quick to anger. Perfect for me, he interrupted. My equal in all things, my partner, my love. They stood together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, watching the first stars appear. The mockingbird had fallen silent, replaced by the distant howl of coyotes. But Sarah felt no fear, not with Jacob beside her, not with new life growing within her, not with the future spreading before them full of possibility. We should head back, Jacob said eventually. Rosa will worry. Let her worry a little. She enjoys it. Sarah turned in his arms to face him. I want to remember this. Standing here where I can see everything we've built, everyone we've become. Want to remember the moment I finally understood. Understood what? That love isn't weakness. That opening your heart again after loss isn't betrayal. It's courage. That the walls I built to protect myself were really a prison. She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach. This child will grow up knowing love. Jacob, real love. Honest love. Not perfect, but true, like its mother. Jacob said softly, brave and true. They mounted their horses and rode home through the gathering darkness, side by side as they'd face whatever came next. Sarah thought of the woman she'd been, closed off, bitter, certain that survival meant solitude. That woman had served her purpose, kept her alive through the worst. But she was gone now, transformed by love and work, and the patient devotion of a man who'd seen through her walls to the heart she'd tried to bury. The house came into view, windows glowing with lamplight, Rosa's silhouette moving in the kitchen. Home. Not just a building or a piece of land to defend, but a true home built on partnership and trust and the kind of love that grew stronger with each passing season. I swore I'd never love you. Sarah murmured again, wonder in her voice. But your kiss stole my heart. Jacob reached over to take her hand. And you stole mine the day you aimed that rifle at outlaws and refused to back down. We're a pair of thieves, it seems. The best kind, she agreed. The kind that steal hearts and build homes and make babies and prove that sometimes the best promises are the ones we break. They rode into the yard, where Miguel was already taking the horses and Rosa waited with supper and scolding and love. The coyotes sang in the distance, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And Sarah Mackenzie Sullivan, widow, survivor, wife, and soon-to-be mother, finally understood that the walls she'd built had never protected her heart. They'd only kept it from finding its way home. As she followed Jacob into their house, their life, their future, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for broken vows and stolen kisses and the courage to love again. The desert had tested her, shaped her, nearly broken her. But in the end, it had given her everything, A man who saw her truly, a love worth the risk, and the promise of new life to carry their story forward. The heart wants what it wants, and Sarah's heart, the one she'd sworn to keep locked away forever, had wanted this all along. It just took a rancher's patient love and one pivotal kiss to finally set it free. In the doorway, she paused and looked back at the vast landscape, silvered by moonlight and alive with possibility. "Thank you," she whispered to the desert, to the stars, to whatever force had brought her through fire and loss to this moment of perfect contentment. Then she stepped inside, into warmth and light and love, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this wild journey through the American frontier. I hope Sarah and Jacob's story touched your hearts as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know if you're enjoying these tales from your ranch, your daily commute, or perhaps while working on your own dreams. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. Share your thoughts about Sarah's transformation. Did her journey resonate with you? Until next time, partners, keep your hearts open and your spirits strong.